No new charter schools. That's the request from the NAACP at their national convention in Cincinnati. A resolution was approved calling for a moratorium on the expansion of charter schools. The resolution reads in part, charter schools have contributed to the increased segregation rather than diverse integration of our public school system, and that weak oversight of charter schools puts students and communities at risk of harm, public funds at risk of being wasted, and further erodes local control of public education. The resolution reaffirms the 2014 resolution, and the NAACP opposes the privatization of public schools and or public subsidizing or funding of for-profit or charter schools. Of course, it will not become official policy for the NAACP until its national board meeting later this fall. But so many charter schools are actually doing well. More than 3 million kids across the country are actually in charter schools. The question is this sound policy for African Americans? Joining us in the studio, Washington Bureau Director of the NAACP, Hillary Shelton, via FaceTime, Dr. Steve Perry, founder and head of schools for Capital Preparatory Schools, and also joining us via FaceTime, President of Democrats for Education Reform, Shavar Jeffries. So, Hillary, this particular resolution was offered from the floor. Was a particular state, or did it come from the board?
It was from a particular state. The way our system is set up, any member of the NAACP in good standing can submit a resolution to be considered by the national organization at our national convention. This came up through the normal process of review and onto the floor of our convention just 2 weeks ago.
But here's the question: if you look at right now, and look, I'm a school choice supporter. If you look at what's happening in Harlem, you got thousands, 20,000 parents on waiting lists to get into charter schools. Steve Perry had a school there in Hartford, Connecticut. Thousands on a waiting list as well. Sounds to me like parents, especially black parents, are saying they want the option. And in fact, we did a poll here. Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster, did this. 72% of black parents favor charter schools. Is the NAACP out of step with black folks?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, we're looking at exactly what's happening in charter schools. About 18 years ago, we came out with our first position on charter schools. And what we said was charter schools need to be at least a minimum standard of any public school. What we had during those times and thereafter were charter schools that were being put in place in many places to undercut many of the policies and protections civil rights has provided. Things like, for instance, making sure that teachers at least have a degree and are certified before they teach. That's a minimum standard. Many charter schools went around that and even hired teachers without degrees at all, creating all kinds of other problems. We had charter schools that were carpetbaggers. That is, they'd come in, and before they could figure out that the charter school was not providing the service, the charter school was gone. Now, look, you're right. There are some charter schools that have proven effective, but if you go back and talk to the assistant secretaries for civil rights in the Department of Education, the last two, you'll find all the suits that have been filed because charter schools are being utilized in places like Mississippi, Alabama, and North Carolina as tools to maintain segregation. So in essence, that's why we're calling for a moratorium. We've got to take a closer look at this. There's a big problem with how these schools are being utilized in so many areas. Now, we can point to a few. There's a good one in New York that seems to be showing good results. There's a couple of schools other places. Few good results, but just a few.
No, I won't say few. I mean, I can show you a number of schools. Steve Perry, I want to go to you. Your reaction to this resolution?
They couldn't be more out of touch if they ran full speed in the other direction. Americans are deciding with their feet that they want to go to better schools, and how dare the national office of the NAACP show that they're out of touch even with their own chapters. In fact, as I travel around the country, some of the biggest proponents of school choice are NAACP local chapters. They're the ones who bring people like you and me, Roland, in to talk about, guess what? The same thing. This is just another example of it's more proof that the NAACP has been mortgaged by the teachers union. And they keep paying y'all to say what they want to say. Recognize one of the first things he mentioned was the teachers. You want to know what happens when we don't have to go through the rules of certification? We're able to hire the 5 black males that I'm able to hire to be faculty here at Capital Prep in Bridgeport. That's 5 black males, 3 of whom went to Morehouse, which has no education school unless they go over to Spelman. So I'm able to bring in African Americans to teach African American children in the African American community, in which 90% of the children are reading, writing, and doing math below grade level, brother. If you really will children, then you recognize that it's not a few schools. In fact, it's more the rule than not. If you look at the Credo study, one of the things that you would find out is that the group that is most benefiting from school choice in general and charters in specific are African-American males. You want to stop the school to prison pipeline? Then stop sending black boys to failed schools that keep funding the NAACP through teachers union dues, man.
Hillary?
If you're focused, if you're really focused on
Hold on,
it.
Steve. Hillary?
Well, first, it's probably a good idea to set aside who's being paid by who, especially since he works for a charter school and it pays his salary. That's not a good idea for this conversation.
No, actually, he runs, I mean, he's an owner. He doesn't work for one.
No, he owns it.
Gotcha,
Exactly.
gotcha.
He makes a living. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Not a good idea to talk about who's paying for who for what.
But you work for the NAACP, so do we therefore undermine what you're saying?
No. I'm just trying to say what our policy positions are, and I appreciate
the NAACP who's taking almost $500,000 from the teachers.
Let me just say that the issue very well is how these charter schools are being run. That's the issue on the table. I thought the idea was to take a good look at what's been happening. I've talked to both Russell and Ali from the Department of Education, who's the undersecretary who actually oversees enforcement of civil rights of our schools across the country, including charter schools. I'm telling you exactly how this stuff has worked. Secondly, if we look at the schools that were utilized, the places where the suits were filed, in places like Mississippi and Alabama and others, what you'll see is that indeed there was discrimination.
But here's a question. Why not call for a moratorium in those states as opposed to a national?
No. Why not call for a moratorium? No, Roland. Why not call for a moratorium of the traditional schools in which over 90% of children can't read, write, or do math? Why? Because those teachers' associations are paying y'all. Come on, man. You understand your credibility has completely been impugned because your own local chapters don't support you.
Hold tight 1 second. Shavar wanted to jump in here, then we'll go back to Hillary. Shavar?
Well, I want to say a few things. One is I think this conversation will be more fruitful. We get past some of these character attacks. Steve is a legendary educator of our children, and NAACP over history has been one of the best proponents of civil rights in our community. But that said, charter schools have proven themselves throughout this country to change the lives of children of color. In many of our cities, they're a beacon of hope. The Credo Institute that was referenced earlier, that report shows that in the largest cities in the United States, the public charter schools are the best performing public schools in those cities and are frankly reversing achievement gaps in some cities where frankly some of the kids of color are outperforming white kids in the suburbs. And so anything that works for children, we have to be able to support. We've in many of our cities for decades, our traditional public schools have failed our children, failed our communities. Do we have some excesses with some charter schools? Sure. Do we have even more excesses in many traditional public schools as well? Of course we do. And so wherever we find bad practice, we have to regulate that. But overall, public charter schools throughout this country are doing tremendous work for our young people, particularly our young children of color. And we absolutely need everyone who cares about kids of color to support those schools are doing a great job for our babies.
Hillary?
I would just take a good look on the NAACP's website at naacp.org. You see a good analysis of the challenges we have with charter schools. Now, I'm not saying some of them aren't doing well. Some of them are. Some we've heard of as good examples of even what local public schools can do as well. But when charter schools are being utilized as a tool of segregation, when charter schools are being utilized as a tool to actually undereducate our children by putting teachers in place that have no degree, that have not been certified, then we have a problem. And those are the kind of charter schools we want to make sure do not continue to operate throughout our society. What we're calling for is a moratorium to be able to study the issue, to make sure and take a look at what's going on.
A lot of these premises Hillary is relying upon, frankly, are myths. And there's very little evidence to support that. Are there some extraordinary excesses? Yes. But the data shows that overall, the charters are hiring highly qualified, competent educators who are doing a great job for our kids.
Steve?
Yeah, in addition to that, it's against the law to have even less than a majority. So in places like New York City, over 75% of the faculty have to be certified. Now, if certification were important, then the schools that have 95 and 100% of children who can't read, write, or do math at grade level, yet have 100% that are certified, would be the problem. See, what happens is he's just speaking from the teachers union hymnal. That's all he's doing. This is not about what's good for children. It's not about what the parents are doing. You mentioned earlier, Roland, we ran a school that wasn't a charter school in Hartford, Connecticut. Over 2,700 children were on the waiting list. Their parents were making micro-political decisions. They were saying they know what's best for themselves. And right now, Roland, as you and I speak, I'm in a school. I'm in a charter school in a city, which is Bridgeport, which 94% of children are reading, writing, doing math below grade level. They always talk about us taking money from the traditional schools. We receive $11,000 per pupil. The school up the street, which is closed, by the way, for the summer because, you can't have them open during the summer. The same school in which every child who goes into those schools every single day during the school year is patted down. Those schools receive $15,000 per pupil and $100 million for a building. We get zero. Yet and still, our children right now in the room, right on the other side of this wall, are learning math. And they have blazers and ties on because their parents are tired of it. Our children are part of the revolution, and it's high time that the NAACP woke up and recognized that this is our community. It's about the CP, not about the AFT and the NEA.
Well, let me just say once again, we want to make sure that the charter schools live up to the standards that are set up by our civil rights laws we fought so hard for. No excuses for not being able to meet those minimum standards. Do you apply those same standards
to the failed schools?
We want to make sure that every single school at least has what our children desire. In other words, a charter school should not start at the bottom and below the floor for public schools, but should start at that floor and move up from there.
Yeah, but
what we're saying in many places is
apply along those lines. We say floor. Are you speaking of funding? What are you speaking of?
Standards. Standards and curricula.
There's just no evidence of that. I mean, honestly, these are just.
Go ahead.
These are just, and I respect Hillary and I respect NAACP deeply, but these are frankly tall tales.
What are you talking about?
There's very limited evidence of
Steve,
any
one
of
second,
these.
Steve.
Let me finish.
Steve, one second.
Let me finish.
Steve, one second.
There's very limited evidence of some of the things Hillary's talking about in terms of public charter schools not meeting standards for kids. In fact, the public charter schools generally outperforming standards for young people. And that's exactly why parents throughout our community, Black, low-income families in our cities, they are flocking to charters. The parents are smart. They know what they're doing.
So here's
they know these schools are changing the lives of their kids, and that's why they're embracing them in tremendous numbers.
So Hillary, here's my question. Before the National Board votes on this, are you going to bring in a pair? Are you going to bring in a Bishop Jakes as a charter school in Dallas? Are you going to bring in the countless Black churches across the country who actually have charter schools? African Americans who I have personally met. In fact, we're sitting right here in D.C. Will you bring in Donald Hintz, who runs the extensive charter school here, network here in D.C., African American, one of the most effective charter school networks in America? Will the board do that?
Well, let me say a couple things. What the board has already done is, this is a resolution that's coming up from our membership. The way things work for us at a very democratic, small D-based organization is, again, any member of the NAACP.
No, I got the resolution. What I'm saying is, are you going to bring in Black folks who run charter schools to get their perspective?
Let me first start out by saying 2,200 Black folks voted on this thing at our convention week before last. A lot of research has been done on a number of studies. Look at the Pew Foundation study, as a matter of fact. Look at the Department of Education study as well on the effectiveness of
Are you going to bring in Black people? Black people who run charter schools to get their perspective. African Americans, I can give you a list.
Well, let me just say we'd be happy to take your list. I can give you a list of those who've already been considered. When the resolution was written and the information that came forward by those who moved forward, many studies were looked at before we got to this point.
Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying the NAACP, if the NAACP National Board is going to vote on a resolution calling for a moratorium on charter schools, I think the NAACP should talk to Black people who actually run in charter schools, who are creating those schools for the benefit of educating Black kids.
Well, let me say the charter schools have been reviewed at every level, not only from the level of African Americans, but also from the level of white Americans in our society as well.
Hillary, y'all might want to talk to Black charter school operators. That's all I'm saying.
And we have.
David.
Hillary, just to change it up real quick, you mentioned a couple of times that that part of the resolution, or the motivation for the resolution, was that charter schools are being used in certain states that you mentioned as tools of segregation. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yes, indeed. Much like was studied in the 1960s, when schools are put in receivership and having to integrate, one of the things that happened is tools are being utilized to create academies, as they called them during those days. Some very similar things have been done very recently. I've had many conversations with the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education, and the suits that have had to been filed because charter schools were actually being set up in areas, Mississippi, Alabama, North Carolina, and a couple other places and whatnot. They were set up, but then they were utilized as tools to prevent African Americans.
But just to quickly follow up on that, sorry, Steve.
Real quick, I'm over time here, real quick.
Yes, very
why not address those specific schools instead of across the board?
That's what I asked. Why do a national moratorium with those specific states?
The shorthand is we've been very actively involved in those lawsuits, but we're seeing this much more broad than we might think. We have a number of good charter schools that are being pointed to here, and that's great. We're not calling for an elimination of charter schools. Keep in mind, we're talking about a moratorium. Before more charter schools can be set up. Correct. Correct. National, 50 states, all over the
So why
United
would you
States.
call for a 50-state moratorium
Because if
the argument is that it's being used in specific states?
In a number of states across the country, it has. But not just there. Even in Wisconsin, we had major problems and whatnot with charter schools. And we did invite those that created those schools in Wisconsin to come and talk to us. So the bottom line is that it's not limited to just 1 or 2 states. And with a moratorium, all we're saying is, let's take a good look. Before we set up another charter school, let's make sure that everything is in place, and the kind of discrimination that we've been experiencing is not something that carries forward.
Steve, 20 seconds. Shavar, 20 seconds.
I mean, he's already shown his true colors. We recognize that they haven't done the research and they're not listening to what the African-American community is saying. So they're showing how out of touch that they are. Sad but true. We on the other side are going to fight our behinds off to make sure that more children get access to quality education, regardless of it's charter, traditional, or homeschool. Whatever is required to make sure African-American children get access to a quality education,
Shavar, 20 seconds, go.
There are a handful of states that have very bad charter authorization, and we would love to partner with NAACP and anybody to hold those schools accountable. Excellent. But we would also love to partner with NAACP to hold traditional public schools that have failed Black and brown families for decades accountable as well. The bottom line is the majority of public charter schools are doing great things for our kids. There are some that aren't, and we'll work with anybody to hold any school accountable to do the right thing for our kids.
Folks, we'll leave it right there. Well, this is not the last time we'll have this conversation.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. News 1 Now with Roland Martin, every weekday morning at 7 on TV 1.